Way back in 1993, a young Swedish scientist, Gustav Nordenskjöld, he published this book that really just blew the doors off what people thought they knew about ancient America. It was called The Cliff Dwellers of the Mesa Verde, and it was the world's first truly scientific look at this incredible lost civilization, a kingdom of cities built right into the cliffs of Colorado and then just abandoned. So let's dive into the world that he uncovered.
You can almost feel the awe, right? Just reading his words. Imagine it. You've been riding for what feels like forever through this monotonous pine forest. And then, all of a sudden, you're right there, on the edge of a massive canyon. And you look across, and there it is. Tucked under this huge stone archway is an entire city. Not on the ground, but hanging in the cliff face. It must have been absolutely mind-blowing. So let's start right there, with the central puzzle of these incredible structures. I mean, they're magnificent, they're kind of ghostly, and they make you ask some really big questions. This is the great enigma, isn't it? The question that drove Nordenskjöld and still fascinates us today. You're looking at what is so clearly the work of a smart, organized society, a people who could pull off some incredible engineering. And yet, they're gone. They didn't just leave these cities, they vanished from history, leaving nothing behind but these silent stone monuments. You know, Nordenskjöld talks about these places being perched in spots that are almost impossible to get to. And he mentions that when he asked the local Ute people about the ruins, they just shrugged. They had no stories, no legends, nothing. The people who lived here had been gone for so long that all memory of them had been completely wiped from the land. It was a true lost world. So to really understand the story of these cliff dwellers, we first have to get to know the guy who brought their world back into the light. And this wasn't just some treasure hunter, okay? This was the birth of real scientific archaeology in the American Southwest. So picture this. It's 1891, and Nordenskjöld, this young scientist from Sweden, he links up with the Wetherill brothers. These guys were local ranchers, and they knew those canyons like the back of their hands. For the next year or so, they began the first truly methodical study of these ruins. And that work led to his big book in 1893, which just fascinated and, frankly, shocked the world.
Now, this is what made him such a game changer. Before Nordenskjöld, most people who went into these ruins were just looking for cool stuff, for curiosities. But he had a totally different mindset. He wasn't collecting things, he was collecting information. He used photography, which was a huge deal, for what he called objectivity. He drew detailed maps, took meticulous notes, and he looked at every single find not as a prize, but as a clue, a piece of the puzzle to figure out how these people actually lived. So, what did this new scientific approach actually show him? What kinds of clues did Nordenskjöld manage to pull from centuries of dust? Let's take a look at what he learned about the everyday lives of the cliff dwellers. His careful digs painted a picture of a society that was remarkably advanced. He found this beautiful, intricate pottery. He said the cliff people were absolute masters of the craft. He found perfectly preserved ears of corn, proving they were really skilled farmers. They wove fabric from cotton and, get this, even from feathers. And maybe most amazing of all, they had figured out how to build terraces for farming right on the steep canyon slopes. This was not some primitive tribe. This was a complex culture that had totally adapted to a very tough environment. And this right here really shows you how skilled they were. Nordenskjöld did a direct comparison. He looked at the stonework in the ancient Cliff Palace and then at walls being built by the Moqui Pueblo people in his own time, in the 1890s. And the ancient walls were way better. The stones were carefully cut and shaped to fit together perfectly. The people who built Cliff Palace were master stonemasons, whose skills were, in some ways, even better than the people who came hundreds of years later. Inside these cliff villages, Nordenskjöld kept finding these unique, circular, underground rooms he called estufas. Now, these weren't just places to live. Their special shape and central location told him they were the very heart of the community. These were the places for ceremonies, for important councils, probably where the men gathered to work, kind of like the kivas you see in modern public cultures. Finding these pointed to a really rich social and ceremonial life. The preservation inside these cliff dwellings was just unbelievable. Because they were tucked under these massive rock overhangs, they were protected from rain, from snow, from everything. The air was so incredibly dry that Nordenskjöld found not just tools and pottery, but perfectly preserved human remains, mummies made naturally by the dry air. It gave a literal face to these ancient people.
But here's the thing. For all the clues he found about how these people lived, Nordenskjöld was faced with an even bigger, more haunting puzzle. Why did they leave? And it seemed like every new discovery just led to more questions.
And this is the great contradiction of Mesa Verde. On one hand, you have all this evidence of a stable, successful community. They had food stored up, their farms were ready to go. But then you find these other clues that are just deeply disturbing. Why on earth would you bury your dead inside your own living rooms? Why build defensive walls as if you're about to be attacked? It all points to a community under some kind of terrible stress, a crisis that made them run, leaving almost everything behind.
So what happened? Nordenskjöld himself had a few ideas based on what he saw. He figured that, as farmers, they were probably an easy target for more nomadic, warlike tribes. All those defensive walls seemed to back that up. He also pointed to the brutal environment. The rivers were almost always dry. A really long drought would have been game over. No water, no crops. Whatever the final straw was, it looks like they had to get out, and get out fast. In the end, Nordenskjöld didn't have the final answer. And you know what? That might be the most important part of his legacy. He took these ruins from being just a romantic curiosity and turned them into a real scientific problem. He gave us the foundation, the data, and most importantly, he gave us the right questions to ask about this amazing civilization. His work opened a door to the past, and through it, we saw this incredibly complex society that reached amazing heights, only to completely disappear. And even now, more than 100 years later, with all our modern science, the silence from those empty stone cities is just profound. It leaves us to wonder what those final days were like for the people of Mesa Verde. Why did they leave their kingdom in the cliffs?